I quite recently finished playing Wasteland 2, and I gotta say, I really liked this game. Probably the best thing about this game and what I like about it most is the story. Because the story is very... how the hell do I describe it? Well, let me put it this way. The game is like what an RPG should be, with building your characters, naming them, giving them different traits and abilities, and then having options in basically every quest line and things playing out unexpectedly. Like, this game does all that perfectly. Like, Fallout New Vegas did a lot of that stuff well. This game does it even better. Like, everywhere you go, there's shit happening, and there's sides to be taken. That sounds weird. Rip someone's side. Take half their fucking ribs out. Yeah, it's exactly what I'm talking about. Nah, you gotta... basically, everywhere you go, there's, like, choices you have to be made. You have to side with one group or another or try to make peace between them. And there's a lot of times where I made choices thinking it would work out well, and it just completely backfired. Because it even says on one of the loading screens that, like, Rangers try their best, but sometimes there's not a happy ending to be found. And I definitely felt that. Like, there were several different times on my original playthrough where I thought I was doing the right thing and it just made things spiral out of control. I want to spoil shit so bad, but at the same time, I don't want to ruin anything because this game was a hell of a lot of fun. And most of these things wouldn't be as interesting if you knew they were coming. Well, starting out anyway, you're a ranger, which means, well, not any old ranger, you're a desert ranger. So your job as a desert ranger is to basically be the law and order in the wasteland, or the closest thing to it anyway. So it's your job to go around and help people and solve problems for them, and not necessarily be heroes, because not everyone's gonna like you for the shit you end up doing. Like, you have to take sides, you have to make tough decisions, and not everyone's gonna like the decisions you make, so you're really not heroes, but you are trying your best to find the best outcomes you can. Like, it's basically your job to keep the peace and fight off raiders. It's basically your job to fight off raiders and try to keep the peace and respond to distress signals and help out settlements in return for food and water and supplies and shit. And basically every place in the game is having issues and they need your help to resolve conflicts. Some internal, some external, but always shit going on, which makes it more impactful when you have to make these choices and pick sides, knowing that some people aren't gonna like you for it, because it's your job to be the peacekeepers and the law and order, but doing your job makes people not like you, which kind of sucks, because part of your job is spreading the word of the Desert Rangers and trying to uphold their good reputation, which is pretty hard to do, considering that basically every choice you make is gonna piss somebody off. But back to the story. Anyway, a ranger named Ace, who's an old, well, not really old, but he's a more experienced ranger who's been around a while, was killed in action, and you as the new recruits have been tasked to figure out what the hell happened and to finish his mission, which was to set up some repeaters at radio towers to try and find the source of some threatening radio waves. Threatening radio waves. Well, threatening messages coming over the radio waves. More crazy wasteland bastards doing crazy wasteland crap, but a whole bunch of them. And you don't know whether they're a serious threat or not. So basically your job for the first chunk of the game is to set up the radio towers, fix them up, figure out what the hell happened to Ace. And that basically starts you on your journey, eventually winding up trying to track down these sources of hostile radio waves. It's very similar to the old Fallout games, except built with modern game design, which does a lot for the game. Like, I liked Fallout 1 and 2, but after playing this game, my opinion of them is not as good as it was, because there's so many things that this game just does really well without any of the drawbacks of Fallout 1 and 2, which story is a lot easier to follow, and you actually have a really good logbook that tells you what quests you're doing. Whereas in Fallout 1, they'd give you like the vaguest possible one sentence trying to describe the side quest, which didn't help at all. So if you didn't memorize what the NPCs were saying, it wouldn't be that hard to not know how to do a side quest or end up getting completely lost. Which, I mean, Wasteland 2, it doesn't give it doesn't guide you by the nose everywhere, but it doesn't like leave you in the dust not knowing what the hell's going on. Like, you can always look at your logbook and it'll set you on the right path, so you don't need to spend the entire game wandering around trying to figure out what the hell you're supposed to be doing. Like Fallout 1 and 2, as well as the original Wasteland, which I played a little bit of it, but I couldn't really get into it. The game's a lot better balanced in terms of like character creation and stats and skills. Like, all of the skills and your main attributes they're all useful. There's none of them that are useless. They all have their uses. And with having a team, instead of just you and some companions that do the stupidest thing possible and get themselves killed, you're actually in control of your team for the most part. So with that, even if one attribute on a certain character isn't useful, on another character it might be. Like, charisma is really good for your leader character, though you might not really need it for your other characters. Like, in Fallout, charisma is like always complete garbage useless. And then intelligence is always the best, and like, it's very easy to know which ones are the best and which ones aren't, and there's not a hell of a lot of variety to it. There's like a very obvious optimal build for everything. Whereas with Wasteland 2, it's not quite so obvious, because all of the different stats have their use, and it doesn't give you so many attribute points that you have any to spare. So you kind of need to be careful with your placement, and you're not just given so many that you can just do everything with every character. And then the skills, like every single one of the skills have their uses. There's some overlap with some of them, but they're all useful. Whereas in Fallout 1, a lot of the skills I just wouldn't use, or I might use them like once in the entire game. The game never lets you get too powerful, well, generally speaking. Like, you gain skill points pretty slowly, then gaining attribute points is like every 10 levels or something. And perks, you don't get them very often. Like, basically the ideal strategy for the game is to just give each character their roles and let them be specialists. Like, most of the time, other than weapon skills, most of your skills you really don't want to double up on, because then they're just kind of pointless. So each character is supposed to have their own skills and uses, and having companions that you can control and having a squad makes combat a lot more tactical and strategy based with cover and everything. Whereas in Fallout 1 and 2, you'd kind of just be standing around the field shooting back and forth. Maybe that's selling those games a little short, but it's not really that far off. Whereas in Wasteland 2, you need to take tactical positioning and use cover and movement, and there's a lot more strategy to it. Like, starting out, you get to make your 4 characters, and probably the best strategy would just be to give 1 pistol, 1 assault rifle, 1 shotgun, and 1 sniper. Because those 4 weapons are viable early game, and basically every weapon in this game is viable up until the very end. But some of them aren't so good early game, like submachine guns, energy weapons, and heavy guns, because, well, first of all, it's hard to get enough ammo for them. And then energy weapons are really only good against like heavily armored targets, so it's not very helpful early game. Then the submachine gun and heavy guns, they're all burst fire weapons. In an early game, you're not going to be accurate enough to fucking hit anything with them. So you're basically just going to be wasting ammo with them. Melee weapons are fine early on. I don't know as I would really want to use melee late in the game. I mean, you totally could. Like, all the weapon skills are balanced so that they're viable throughout the entire game, which I really appreciate that, because it really sucked in Fallout 1 and 2, where heavy guns and energy weapons were basically useless till the end of the game, and then at the end of the game, small guns would become useless, which I didn't really like that. That kind of bugged me. Yeah, and basically every weapon has their own role, their own position. I mean, assault rifles are the best. Like, other than assault rifles pretty much obviously being the best weapon throughout the entire game, other than that in particular, they all have their uses, and there generally aren't ones that are necessarily better than others. Like, they're all generally quite situational. Assault rifles just happen to be the best because they work from medium to long range, which gives them that makes them basically the best well-rounded weapon, as well as them having burst fire as well as single shot, so you can be accurate with them or deal out more damage if you need to. Well, I guess you'd have to be accurate before you can do bursts anyway, but they're really accurate in single fire mode, and then in burst fire you can get pretty good damage output. And then they don't use up ammo too much. Of course, if you have too many assault riflemen? Oh no, that sounds a little weird. Like, rifleman sounds normal, but assault rifleman sounds a little off. I don't know why. I mean, if you have too many on your team, you'll be competing for ammo, which is a pain in the ass because you're not always going to be right next to a shop that sells ammo. And being out of ammo, unless your character also uses a melee weapon, they're going to be pretty much useless when they run out of ammo, which is why I recommended starting out with each character using a different weapon. When you loot ammo, you're going to be getting like a wide variety of different ammo, so if you just use a wide variety of weapons like that, you're going to have an easier time keeping supplied with ammo. The difficulty of the game, sometimes it just wildly fluctuates, which isn't necessarily bad. I just thought I'd mention it. Like, one moment you're fighting raiders and you're just tearing them to shreds. The next you run into a couple of robots and you don't stand a fucking chance. But some fights end up being easy and then others are like really goddamn hard. And it just goes back and forth. It's like one or the other, basically all the time. But they're still all definitely viable, and you still need to use a variety of weapons because of ammo. So it's not really that big of a concern. I mean, you still want a well-rounded team. Oh, one thing about shotguns, they function kind of weird. Like, you have a cone of fire, and anything in that takes the full amount of damage. So it doesn't matter if they're, like, getting nicked by the cone of fire, or if they're, like, right in the middle of it. They all take the same amount of damage, which, I mean, that works fine from a gameplay perspective. I think it's just a little weird from a more logical perspective. Well, it'd be interesting if they had a system where the shotgun fired a number of pellets and they spread out in the cone of fire, and they calculated damage based on how many pellets hit each enemy. I mean, I imagine that would be a really complicated system, but it would kind of be interesting to see how something like that would work. And, well, one of the main things I like about this game, aside from the tactical combat, which I do quite like that. Like, I'm not huge into strategy games, but I have definitely enjoyed some tactical combat before, and this game does it pretty well. Have to hold back. On my first playthrough, I completely missed the first companion in the game. Like, completely missed him. Like, I didn't look around Ranger Citadel before I left, so I completely missed him. And it's like, you know, if I had that extra companion, that probably would have been helpful. And because of how differently things play out depending on what choices you make in different locations, like, I was replaying it to get footage because I didn't record my initial playthrough, and I was constantly discovering things like an item for a quest that I wasn't able to complete on my first playthrough. It's like, oh, it was there? You kidding me? Why the hell didn't I think of that? And there's all sorts of shit like that where on the second playthrough, I'm just coming across shit that I missed on the first one. Like, one of the first major choices you have to make is, after going to the first radio tower and setting it up and trying to figure out what happened to the Ranger Ace who got murdered, you get two distress signals at basically the same time, and they're both really dire situations, and you have to choose which one to respond to. And both of these locations are equally important. So that's basically the first major decision of the game, is which settlement do I let die? Like, oh, thanks. Great choice to be making. And you can't save both. You gotta pick one. That's probably one of the more straightforward quests, because really only two options: save the one or save the other. Well, there might be more than that, I don't know. I'm constantly being surprised by different situations that I could have taken that I didn't know were options. Like, damn, there's so many interesting choices and scenarios that come up in the game where things didn't play out how I thought they would at all, that I want to talk about, but it would kind of ruin it. Like, part of what made this game was so interesting was because I didn't expect anything in particular. Like, if I knew that this shit was coming and that it was gonna happen, it wouldn't be as interesting. Like, if I tell you I made this choice and then this happened and I didn't expect it, then I ruin it for you. Which sucks, because I really want to talk about things that fucking happen in this game. Like, everywhere you go, there's interesting shit happening. Different sorts of conundrums and choices to be made, and quests can be played out in many different ways depending on what skills you do or don't have. And, like, even looking at the achievements for the game, I realized, wait, I could do that? And I'm sure there's plenty more things that just completely flew over my head. And like I was saying earlier with, like, game balance and shit, the game never lets you get too powerful, because, yeah, you might find a new weapon and be powerful for a little while, but sooner or later it's going to catch up with you, and enemies are going to have better weapons, and you're going to be basically right back where you were. The game, it scales up pretty heavily. So you're never going to be too powerful for very long before the game catches up with you. Like at the beginning of the game, I think you have an assault rifle that does like maybe 7 to 9 damage or something. Then I think at the end of the game, I had one that did 150 to 180 something damage. Pretty big difference. Like after being at the end of the game and then starting over, I was like, damn, the weapons did that little damage? Yeah, like I kind of forgot about it. The numbers just kept getting bigger and bigger and I completely forgot what they were at the beginning of the game. And honestly, in my first playthrough, I really did have like a personal connection with my team. Like the different characters I created and then gave them specific skills. So it really felt like role playing. And I was actually kind of attached to some of the characters a little bit, even if they didn't say anything and they just were characters I created by giving them stats. It kind of, they felt like real characters in a way, which I don't think I've ever felt like that. Like I think that's what role playing is supposed to be. This is probably the first game where I've ever just felt attached to random characters I created like that. Like I came up with these characters and gave them stupid names and crap, like, and I did that again on the second playthrough. I came up with characters, gave them names and skills to match their whatever. But I think I'm honestly gonna remember at least one of my original characters from the first playthrough. Because I made, well, you make 4 characters or just choose ones that already exist. That's boring. Don't do that. That's boring. But I made 4 characters. Harriet, who was a field medic gunslinger type. And then there was Patchy, who's an old gunsmith rifleman. Then there's Ivan, who's also a rifleman. But he's good at breaking into things like lockpick. And finally there was Grief. I literally named him Grief. He's a shotgun-wielding, almost raider-like one who specialized in using brute force. But he was the talking one. He's the one who said the dumb shit and tried to negotiate with NPCs and whatever. And then of course there's companions you can recruit out in the world, which each are voiced and have their own distinct personalities. There were a lot of them that I just completely missed or I wasn't able to use because I already had my team pretty well established. In case you're wondering, I played the Director's Cut Edition, which has some graphical upgrades and some other shit. I'm not entirely sure, but just play Director's Cut Edition. Why not? Well, it really felt like a proper journey and adventure. And like by the end, it was a wild ride. It really was. Like it's been a long time since I've beaten a game and just had to stop and think about it. Like I've been listening to the song that was played during the credits. All the music in this game, it pretty much always fits perfectly. A lot of the time it's like just subtle enough so you don't necessarily notice it, but it's generally always really fitting and all just works really well. I could make a more spoilery video on it if anyone were interested in that. I wouldn't mind going through the whole story and just like pointing out different choices that I made and what sort of shit happened that I completely didn't expect. Like I could go into detail on that on another video if anyone was interested, but I don't really want to spoil it here because I absolutely loved this game. I had a great time with it. I think you should play it. Any game you think I should play and do a video on, let me know. Also, if any of you have played this game, or if you're gonna play it, let me know what you think of it. Maybe the game just happens to vibe really well with me, or maybe it just is a really good game. What do you think? And I think I'll have to end it at that.